the church before realized I'm not the pastor, and some of you might be thankful for that. This is my second sermon, and I really appreciate Pastor John and Pastor Bob giving me these opportunities. Whenever you're trying to do something new, something goes wrong, and my laptop decided to stop keeping a charge. It has all of my notes, and so now I have to have this cable. So sorry that it looks a little messy, but it is what it is. So when I think about having an opportunity to not actually have to serve on the worship team, there's something that's really relaxing about that. Because usually when I'm sitting back here or if I'm leading, you always think about things. And to have an opportunity to actually worship, to truly worship and not think about something is so freeing. He made mention to it, Steve made mention to it, the situation that happened at the first service. It's actually kind of funny. They stopped, they didn't know what to do. And how fitting for my sermon. It was an alliteration that maybe was moved by the Holy Spirit. I don't know, maybe just made a mistake. It happens. We make those mistakes, but it's just innocent. But what it is that God gave them something to do. We had a new song. Gave the worship team a challenge. They made a mistake, but they kept going. It has nothing really to do with what I'm talking about per se, but just there's something that just hit me. I appreciate the worship team. Thank you guys. Thank you for giving me a week off. It's nice to be able to worship with you guys out in the congregation. So, today I titled my sermon, Bad Yokes. I'm a corny guy. You're going to have to deal with it. Since it's bad yokes, I feel we have to start with some jokes because every sermon has to have bad jokes in it or it wouldn't be a sermon. So let me get them out of the way now, and then we can move on. Bad yokes. Okay, ready? What day do eggs hate most? And this is group participation. So what day do eggs hate most? Friday. Corny, right? A little bit harder. How do monsters like their eggs? Monster man. Okay, good, maybe. Terra-fried. So bad. What do you call an egg taking a snooze on the job? Someone got this one this morning. What's happening? What was that?
Fired.
Fired? Fried? Yeah. Exhausted. Egg. Okay. Now they're out. I promise. No more jokes. No more
We're
jokes.
used to it with Pastor John.
Yeah, I know. That's why. I'm following his model. I have to have some bad jokes, right? Let me tell you about something that scrambles my egg. I have to admit something. I am awful with directions. I'm so bad at it, and guys, take me in if you understand this. I'm so bad at it that I'm willing to admit it to my wife. It's that bad. If I can admit it to her, then we know something's up. So for the last 10 years, I've been relying on GPS technology, like a lot of us have. Gets us where we need to go. Plug in an address, boom. Gives us instant instruction. It's great. I can shut my brain off and I can drive. I love the drive. It's something that's very soothing to me. Get from point A to point B, shut my brain off and go. Love it. But this is what gets me going. This has happened several times. You might relate. My wife, Teresa, whom I was engaged at the time, were traveling to Ohio for a wedding of one of my good buddies from college. They were someone I had lived with for 5 or 6 years in college, and I was really excited for these two to get married. So we decided to go out there, and Reese, my wife, and I were just recently engaged a couple weeks before. So this was an opportunity to take a look at our wedding ceremony. We've got all these ideas going through our brains. Let's go out, we'll take the trip, it's far away, but let's go. It's my best friend, one of my best friends. We pack up for about a 2-day trip, and we go to Sandusky. We leave about 5 a.m., avoiding all traffic because Chicago traffic is awful in the morning. And we go. Our drive to Ohio was pretty much eventless, other than some beautiful sights, but pretty easy. And I was making sure that I was following this GPS. Put the address in, and we're going to go. I've never been to Sandusky before, so I just assumed GPS was going to get me there. I started looking around. As we're getting closer and closer, I don't know what I'm looking for, but this is great. It's pointing me in the right direction, right? Which was in a dead end in the middle of a forest preserve. So, being the rational, calm man that I am, I look at my wife and I said, "Why did you tell me I was going the wrong way?" She's like, I didn't know. What happened? I'm like, "I don't know." So I pulled my foot out of my mouth and I restarted my GPS. My GPS, because she has a really nice British accent when she talks to me, it's nice. She told me that the route was recalculated. The new route was established. Great. I must have put the address in incorrectly. I don't know what I did, but it's all good now. But I start to think, how far away am I? Am I in the right state? Did I just coast along, not paying attention to anything? I start to follow a new route, and I start to just settle back into my autopilot mode. Cool, GPS, let's go. And I start looking around. Was that the same gas station? Isn't that the tree that we just passed? Whatever. This is going to get me there. And a few minutes later, I am right smack dab in the middle of that same forest preserve at a dead end road. What was I doing wrong? And I had to call my buddy. I don't like to. I'm a man. I do things myself. I had to call my buddy. How do I get to this hotel? Where am I going? I have no idea why the GPS didn't put me in the right place. GPS technology has these glitches. But I had no idea where I was going. I didn't do any research. I didn't look at a map. I trusted a small electronic device to point me in the right direction. You can only imagine how silly I felt. I just snapped at my soon-to-be wife for something that I did. I was trying to blame something else, not me. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. I was stressed. I was lost. I felt anxious. I've had a lot of conversations with people over time. Friends, family, in and out of church. And it doesn't matter where you are in life. I think everyone feels confused at times. Lost at times. I know a lot of us wonder, why is life so hard? Why don't we have what we thought we should have? Why isn't it going the way that we intended it to go? We start to sit around, we start pondering, well, what if? What if I did this? What if only this? The if onlys, the what ifs. We start to lose ourselves in the burdens of life. We never truly find the joy that God intended for us. The stress, the burdens, they start to pile up. Especially when our lives are partnered with the wrong influences. Now, when I say wrong influences, please understand, it's not something always as simple as drugs or alcohol. I, personally, those who know me, I have a first-hand struggle with alcohol and drug addiction for years. I understand those vices and the paths that they lead us on. But those influences, those partners in life, do not always come with warning labels. They do not always come with a looming jail sentence just to wake us up. We are influenced by what we subject our minds to, by what we partner with, who our influences are. The other day, I received a message from an old friend on Facebook. It's someone I hadn't talked to in a long time. And I don't remember the exact conversation, but this is kind of the gist of it. They said something like, "Wow, it looks like you've settled into just an awesome life. I see all these pictures of your baby. I see all these pictures of all these vacations that you go on. You have all these check-ins at all these airports. Man, your career has got to be just skyrocketing. You know, my life isn't that great. But I'm really, really happy to see that yours is going well." I was taken back. I really didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I politely said, "Thank you." I immediately started to think, am I broadcasting a little bit too much of my own life on some random online forum? Facebook claims to be secure, but a little advice: in my full-time career at work, I am a hiring person as well as a project manager, and I have 200 to 400 people working for me at any time, and whenever I'm hiring somebody, the first thing I look at is Facebook. Think about what you're putting up there. So after I made sure that my account was really locked up after all of this, I started to think about it. What just happened? Why did that conversation happen? Someone that I haven't spoken to in years just looked at some page with some digital snapshots of a life that's happily ever after in their mind. My friend doesn't know my struggles, my constant struggle from anxiety. The fact now they're recently thanks to the housing market that I'm now underwater on my mortgage, thank you. And troubled past with drug use. Why would they not see any of that? Most people don't air their dirty laundry on some online forum. So why is Facebook dangerous? It's because sometimes we're looking into other people's lives and only seeing the good parts, the happy pictures, the promotions, the family get-togethers. And most notably, unfortunately in my newsfeed, being in the age group that I am, early 30s, baby pictures, which I am way guilty of putting up there for all of you who are my friend. I'm sorry. I got a cute kid and I'm just smitten. We start to compare our lives to others. This is what happens. We start looking at things. We start comparing. Why are they working out so well for this person, not me? Why don't I have this? I'm good enough for that. Why is my life so hard? And his or her whole life is so awesome. We start to believe that our lives don't measure up, and our pride is tested. If you've been on Facebook, they've just littered with these e-cards. These are slightly meant to be jokes, but at the same time, they're not. We start to think, oh man, Facebook's life is better than mine. It's not true. Facebook is littered with e-cards. We begin to allow our own life decisions to be compared to the small glimpses that we see through rose-colored glasses of all the great things happening in other people's lives. With so many influences pushing and prodding us in different directions, it's no wonder we're turning into a lost generation. For mainstream media, just loading us with temptations of what we're supposed to be or what we're supposed to be doing, to the internet being loaded with every kind of distraction, draws us away from the life that we were put on this earth to live. Our influences, our partners, if you will, they do come in all forms and faces. Life drags us in different directions, winding paths, lost roads. If we are not partnered with someone who has our best interests in mind, and there might have been a time in my life when I thought that empty bottle next to me was my best friend. Didn't do anything to me the next day when the hangover came back. We might think our self-desires of our heart are going to give us just that, whatever that ultimate is. But then the stress comes back, and the anxiety of life, and the burdens. We start to ask, how did I get here? The good news for all of us is Christ. Christ himself, his very words, have something to say about this. Those of you who have Bibles, if you would open them up to the book of Matthew. If you don't have a Bible, please, we have Bibles in the back. At Grace Fellowship Church here, we believe that it's the very Word of God. It is so important to have a Bible in your life, to be influenced by it, to live the words that it speaks. It's the very foundation of a relationship with Christ. So have them. If you don't have them, please, feel free to pick one up. We will have the words on the screen. So we find ourselves in chapter 11. And the verses that we'll be looking at are the very end of chapter 11. The one thing that I've learned, especially it's very dangerous for us in a media world where we just see little blips of single verses popping up different places. You need to understand the context of anything you read. You can take one verse and apply it to 1,000 meanings. Be cautious of that. Understand the context of what you're reading. So before we dig into what I want to talk about, I want to give you a little slight backstory of why. In chapter 11, Jesus just finished explaining to the disciples of John the Baptist. Now, those of you who know who John the Baptist is, he is the very prophet called to proclaim the coming of the Messiah. That is who he is. And he was questioning if Jesus was the Messiah. The good news that I feel, at least for myself, is if someone as huge in the Bible as John the Baptist has his faith waver, I'm not saying it's good, at least I don't feel so bad, that it happens to people, even John the Baptist, called to usher in Christ. So Christ, while slightly admonishing John the Baptist's disciples, he also gives them hope. He says, yes, I am who I say I am. I am here. I am the Messiah whom you seek. He then continues to denounce some of the very towns that he's preached and done countless miracles at. Yet those folks just refused to listen, to believe, to follow. Now what I'm going to say, I say this carefully. I don't want to make light of some kind of situation, but here we are some 2,000 years after Christ. I understand, for those of you here who do not yet know Christ, that it can be hard to see his presence in your life. That it can be hard to understand that he's doing great things amidst whatever trials are happening in your life. I understand that. Understand that Christ is real, and he moves and he works in our lives. But I know we're not all there yet. But those folks, some 2,000 years ago, were seeing it as it happened. And yet they still refused to partner with him, to follow him, to believe in him, and to learn from him. Well, near the end, Christ himself says, and I'm paraphrasing him, that even those from the wicked town of Sodom, if you know your Old Testament history, if you don't, it's okay, I'll tell you quickly. Sodom was a wicked town. It was so wicked, God blew it up, destroyed it by fire. And Christ is saying, even those from the wicked town of Sodom will be better off than those that deny him now. He gives a warning that if you have the opportunity to learn of Christ and still refuse, it's worse than being destroyed by God himself in the town of Sodom. That's tough. But not only was he attacking people, when Christ was giving these messages, he was usually talking about a certain group often. It was those religious influencers of the day. It was the Pharisees. Their hearts were so hardened, they couldn't see the very God of the universe in front of their faces. And what's worse is they dragged others into their condemnation. So often in life, we listen to people who are popular. People who are the major influencers of the day. Why? Because they have celebrity status, because they've got a lot of money, because they were voted into a man-made position. Now, we miss out on the very presence of God when we shut our hearts and minds away from real life. And we focus on fantasies, addictions, selfish gains. This is where it's at. Jesus gives us hope. He gives us rest from those burdens of life. But we have to be willing to listen. We have to be willing to follow and to obey. So if we look at the end of chapter 11, verse 28 through 30, Jesus says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn of me. For I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." In verse 28, Christ calls us into a relationship with him. He's promising rest from our labors, our troubles in life. Now, I understand we don't use, in modern language today, usually the phrase heavy laden. If you don't know what that means, it literally is to be burdened with grievous cares. Or in my, it's just life is hard. That's my way of putting it. We know that. Life is hard. There are times we look back at past situations and we wonder, how did we ever get ourselves into them? Who were we following? What were we listening to? What's influencing our life? Christ directs us to come into him. He offers himself as a walking partner in life. As we see in verse 29, he says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me." So I was having some conversations with family about this very point, and I was realizing that people have no idea what a yoke is. Some of you might, and some of you don't. We live in a big city. We're not agriculturally driven people. So if you don't know what a yoke is, there it is. Literally, a yoke is simply a wooden crosspiece that is fastened over the necks of two animals and attached to a plow or cart that you're going to be pulling. When you think about that, and you look at the image, imagine two animal heads in there. What is it? It's a partnership that exists between the two animals. They're sharing a load together. If you think about that, why would Christ use an example of a yoke? It almost looks medieval prison-ish, some kind of, I don't know, something scary. Why would Christ use this as an example of rest? If you think about this metaphorically for agriculture, wouldn't being yoked to something be difficult? It means work. How is that rest? These two animals are pulling something heavy. How is that rest? And furthermore, even in Jesus' time, the connotation of yoke was negative. It was commonly used as a metaphor for the law of Moses, or the Old Testament law that they received when God had his covenant with the Israelites. And he gave them the laws to follow. It was their perfect law. And over time, obviously man gets his way and makes something perfect into something unbearable. Rules and regulations that were not how it was intended to be. The prophets also spoke of a time when the people of Israel would break the yoke of oppression and return to their own land. If you know Israel history, they were subjugated to slavery through many different kingdoms. And the prophets always spoke of a time when the yoke of oppression would be broken. So, what we have to realize is to the people back then, and even to us, putting on a yoke, that's confusing. That's a negative connotation. Why would we do something like this? But we have to realize Christ's invitation is something quite different. He says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me." Other translations just simply say, "Learn from me." Christ is calling us into an apprentice-master relationship. In church, we use discipleship. He's literally calling us to partner with him in this yoke and walk on straight paths. I mentioned straight paths because does anyone have any idea what happens when you have a double yoke like this and it's not yoked evenly, or it might only have one animal? You're yoked properly. This is what happens. The two animals, quite simple. We're moving forward. If we're yoked improperly, we're not balanced with what we're meant to be yoked with. Imagine only one animal on the left side. They're walking, and they just go in circles. It's not yoked properly. It's not weighted. Now look at that picture and plug your head into one of those sides. Just imagine yourself. Now add that one thing, that one person, that one idea, we may call that an idol, that has a hold of our lives. What is it? Is it money? Desire for fame? Some self-righteous belief that I'm better than someone else? Maybe it's our self-defeating beliefs that we're not good enough for someone or something. When we are not equally yoked with Christ, our lives too make these wide circles, go on wrong paths, get led in wrong directions. And we find ourselves far from the purpose that we were created for. Christ continues in verse 29 by saying, "For I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest for your souls." In contemporary English, I think meekness has a negative connotation these days. People just associate that with weakness. This is not true. This is not true. Christ, in his Sermon on the Mount, specifically said, "Blessed are the meek." How counterintuitive that is in a world where we just assume to stab someone in the back to get what we want, or if someone slights us. Instead of meekness, we have arrogance. Instead of meekness, we have pride and pretense. Instead of meekness, we have artificiality. Christ invites us into his meekness, but how is this going to give us rest? Think about this. You ever had your pride put in check? You've been passed up for something you were absolutely sure you deserved. Did you stew about it for a while? Did you get bitter? What then? You start defending yourself, protecting your heart from criticism, suggestions? Sure. Continue down that path. For years, months, whatever. You will feel the weight of that. It becomes unbearable. Unbearable. I was recently reading a book a few months ago. Author and theologian A.W. Tozer. Guy, read his stuff. If you're looking, just read his stuff. I was reading his book, Pursuit of God. And there was something that was in it that has hit me so hard between the eyes that I'm just going to quote it rather than paraphrase. It's slightly lengthy, I promise you, it's not that long. But if I was to paraphrase this or say this my own, I would do it no justice. A.W. Tozer is specifically talking about the burden that we have of not being meek and what Christ is calling us to. He says, "Such a burden as this is not necessary to bear. Jesus calls us to his rest, and meekness is his method. The meek man cares not at all who is greater than he, for he has long ago decided that the esteem of the world is not worth the effort. He develops toward himself a kindly sense of humor and learns to say, 'Oh, so you've been overlooked. They've placed someone else before you, huh? They have whispered that you're pretty small stuff after all. But now you feel hurt because the world's saying the very same thing about yourself that you've been saying about yourself. Only yesterday you were telling God that you were nothing, a mere worm in the dust. Where is your consistency? Come on, humble yourself and cease to care what men think.' True meekness is not acting like some scared animal or someone with an inferiority complex. A meek person can be just as easily bold and firm in their beliefs, but they've stopped being fooled about themselves. Christ calls us into a partnership with him. The very God of the universe, humble and meek enough to take on the weight, the burden of my sins and your sins, so that we might find rest. It's rest that we receive when we stop thinking about the addictions. We stop thinking about self-doubt or even some holier-than-thou attitude we might have about ourselves. Passing fads, silly trends. Finally, we can stop acting like bending reeds whenever the wind changes direction. As we start to wrap things up, Christ ends in verse 30. He says, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." I am always careful, and we as Christians who are believers need to always be careful when we have conversations with those who are not believers, to never give false hope of a perfect life just because we walk with Christ. Christ does not say, take my yoke and have a giant house. Take my yoke and get rich. Take my yoke and have whatever the world has for you. It's not it. Wearing a yoke signifies that work is to be done. Christ's yoke doesn't free us from illness, of tragedy, difficult work, but he does promise to sustain us as we carry his yoke throughout life, through his discipleship. So you might be asking yourself, how does living by Christ's standards equal easy? Isn't it easier to do what I want? Isn't it a lot easier to do whatever I want than listen to some dusty old book? Sure. Do what you want. There's a lot of things you can do to find comfort in besides Jesus. Sure. Watch some TV. Pound some beers. Go on expensive vacations you can't afford. Watch some porn when no one's watching. Whatever else that you've got. Everyone has something. All they do is just dull the pain of reality. But it's fleeting pleasure. It's just fleeting pleasure. Yoke yourself to that, and you're in those circular paths. Yoke yourself to Christ, and find yourself aligned with God's will for your life. Everything else is just bad yokes. So I ask you, if you are able to free yourself from the wrong yokes and take on Christ's easy burden, would you ever go back? Would you ever go back to how things were? In my studies, I came across a quote. Theologian David Webster says it wonderfully. Who in their right mind would go back to the gods of self, money, lust, or power? Who would return on bended knees to shrines of pious performance and judgmentalism? Is not love better than hate?